Pilot Boys in the building. Let's go.
Pilot Boys, we get on up. We the fly boys, we getting up. You're listening to the Pilot Boys podcast. We are here with a very special guest, Columbus City Council member and attorney, Shayla Favor. Shayla, thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you all for extending an invitation for me to participate today.
Not a problem at all. We go back over 20 years now. That's crazy.
I see that black O still in the background too.
Yes, represent. I love it.
Yes.
Love it. So let's jump right in. You have a very, very awesome story. Obviously, we're very proud of you, following you from our days at Ohio State together, obviously, to what you've become, not just a council member, but just as a person, as an attorney, as a wife, just a lot of different things. And so we're just interested. There's a lot of stuff we want to talk to you about, so we're going to try to cover it all. But I want to start here. Let's start with how and why you decided you wanted to be on city council. That's such a prestigious thing to hold locally. But I want to know what your motivation was initially.
So, in all honesty, a lot of this for me started when we were at Ohio State. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, there used to be this event called the Block Party. Mm-hmm. And every year, hundreds of thousands of people would come to Columbus, Ohio, to celebrate African American Heritage Festival Week. It was coined Block Party, but it was in honor of that celebration. Yeah. And so I think when we were maybe sophomores or juniors, is right around the time that some unfortunate events took place around the time of the Heritage Festival. Mm-hmm. And it was blamed on all of the people that were coming to Columbus. So much so that they would shut down businesses.
I remember that.
Shut down. Would have college people in my dorm, white people in my dorm would leave and started calling it white flight. And I remember because I was heavily involved with our Black events on campus and helping to organize a march because we felt so disenfranchised from the way the event was being handled, the way we were being handled as Black students, wanting to celebrate and honor our traditions. Mm-hmm. Very powerful way. And so I remember me and a couple of my friends, we organized a march on campus. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, that's when I really started recognizing like my voice has power, and that I'm always going to be in a space where I'm going to have to make a decision of doing what is right versus what's comfortable. And there are always going to be people that are going to need advocacy. There are going to always be people that won't have the ability or the educational set or the access to be able to speak up for themselves. And if I have the ability to do that, then why can't I do it? So that started me down that path. I just didn't know that it would be here, a couple years later. So it's always been inside of me to speak up for what's right. And it's not easy, but that's part of my calling.
Speaking of that, real quick, T, speaking of that, it's, there's a lot of national conversation around kind of voting, right? And I think a lot of the conversation, a lot of people's understanding of voting generally just has to do with the president, right? The national president, and maybe a little bit to the Senate for the most part, but for the most part, it seems to be focused around national kind of ideas. Yeah. Whereas there's obviously a lot of influence that a lot of local elections have, particularly for where you live. I mean, a lot of times, in some ways, it can even be more important to vote locally in terms of what your day-to-day life is going to look like. So talk to us a little bit about what exactly is it that your responsibilities are as a Columbus City Council member. What is it that you guys actually do?
Yeah, so we pass everyday statutes and laws that you can feel as a resident of Columbus the very next day. Mm-hmm. And so we handle the budget, where we're creating legislation, things that an everyday resident is going to, that could either help or provide some type of hindrance in their life. And so it's very important to be aware of what is happening locally. So it can be something as minor as trash pickup, right? And who is getting those contracts? When you talk about diversity and access and inclusion, I mean, that really runs the gamut. And so you want to make sure that the city is being responsible in who it awards those contracts to. So if you don't have the right people in power, elected officials in power that are not going to uphold those values that you find very important, you can see how quickly things can get out of hand and people are not represented adequately. So I always encourage people to pay attention to what's happening locally. And I don't know if I have a little opportunity just to say this too. I mean, there were huge primary elections that were held around the country yesterday, in particular, New York and Kentucky. And so oftentimes we find that people don't participate in primaries. They wait until November to participate. But now people understand that, number one, there's generally more than one candidate for each party.
Right.
And it's about getting the right candidate in each party to the polls, right?
Right.
And so in places like Kentucky, where we just had the issue of the excessive force with Breonna Taylor, it is life-saving that we get the right person in Congress representing an area like Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
When you think about New York and how contentious things have been there, and there was a congressman who was caught recently on tape who had an African-American opponent who said, he was caught on a hot mic and said, "I'm only out here marching," and it was the Black Lives Matter march, because I have a race. And that was only been in office for 15, 16 years. You get those people out of here, right?
Yeah.
But we have been, as a society, we haven't been as aware as we should have been how important those elections are. So whether it's local elections or your state elections or national elections, we have to take ownership of where we have misstepped and just start participating in the electoral process.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's very valuable, specifically what you said, in places that we haven't been represented before, specifically, that we need to focus in there. But I wanted to kind of, since we're here now, talk about what's going on in Columbus specifically. We're making the news for a lot of the wrong reasons, and early on in COVID for a lot of the right reasons, right? So it's like we are this state that, even from an electoral process, they call us a swing state, right? We're like generally in the middle. Why do you think that specifically now, and the events recently have finally triggered this city to act aggressively, right? In doing such things as taking down the Columbus statue and even having the conversation around changing the name. Why do you think now is the time? Everyone's known the history, but no one's really confronted it until now. Why do you think that is at a government level? Yeah, well,
the short answer is the political will is there to do it right now, right? It's the flavor of the month. Everybody wants to prove that they are woke enough, they're educated enough, that they understand what is happening in Black and Brown communities, and they want to appear as responsive as possible. And that's a good thing to a certain degree. I wanted to come from a place of actual genuineness, right? And so when we think about how some of our corporations are jumping on board with the movement and this awareness, that it's not that they haven't been aware, right? But there hasn't been the political will, the courage that would take to actually do some of the things that we're advocating from a governmental level to do, but also from a corporate level to do. So, when you have an actual lynching, the murder of a man on TV, you cannot deny, once again, that we have a serious problem in our country. And Columbus is not absolved from that. We have had our own issues of excessive force in our community, and we have to own that. Right? We can't just look at what has happened in Minneapolis or in Atlanta and say, "Oh, that's just them, and that's not Columbus." That could not be further from the truth. And in fact, the state of Ohio has had a problem with excessive force. resource that we have to own and take ownership over, accountability for. So yeah, the time is now. And if you're in this space and you cannot muster the courage to call those things out as they are, you don't deserve to be in this space. Yeah. You don't deserve to be an elected official. Now is the time to be as bold and don't be afraid to ask for what is absolutely right. And what is absolutely right is just common decency, for equality, for equity. That is what people of color are asking for right now. Yeah, there's a lot of other things on the agenda. You could throw reparations in there. You can throw 40 acres and a mule in there. You can throw all those types of things. But at the base level, it's see me as a human. Right? See me as a human. See me as a person that bleeds, just like.
Let me ask you a question on that. Let me ask you a question on that point specifically. And this is just more of a kind of a personal question. That request, I guess you can say, or demand rather, is just to see me as a person in a country that has not always seen people who look like us as even a full person. I mean, you're talking about literally written into the Constitution or into early documents that we are 3/5 of a person, all the way to kind of how people, and that's extended far beyond slavery into Jim Crow and obviously many other things. How do you even, and this may be rhetorical, maybe not able to be answered, but how do you even really get people who don't see you as a person? How do you even start to have that conversation to get people to see you as a person? So I view this two ways. I view it, one is, you try to educate people better, right? Because I think part of the reason why people believe what they believe is because, Black people particularly have been branded a certain way historically and in the media and deliberately, right? That's number one. The second thing I think is put in measures that even if you don't see me that way, that it's going to be hard for you to act out on it, right? And that's like, for example, justice, right? If you see me if we all these cases that we saw justice, we wouldn't be reacting the same way. So I guess it's just a kind of a personal question. How do we even address those issues at a base level?
It is a day-to-day reset, if I could just be completely honest, because that's just who I am. Yeah. It is a daily battle that I think I'm going to just speak specifically as a Black person, as an African American. There's a quote that says to be educated and conscious as an African American is to always to be in a state of rage.
Yeah, right? James Baldwin.
Yeah, my homeboy. Yeah. And so you understand that the space that we are in as Black people, it's a gift and a curse. That the things that have been put upon us to carry, we never asked for. We did not create those things, but they're here. And there is a moment for us to be the change that we absolutely want to see in this country. Yeah. And for me, I always have to keep in the forefront of my mind, no matter how much my heart breaks, no matter how hurtful this moment is, that there were people that came before me that died so I could be in this space. I can't give up right now. Right? I can't. Like there were, and if you think about slavery and Civil War and then Reconstruction and then Jim Crow, I mean, we come from a history of people who have been brutally beaten and chastised and held as capital, as products, as a commodity. But yet we are still here. I am still sitting in an elected position. I'm not supposed to be here. And so that means that there's a higher calling, there's a higher purpose, and the journey isn't over for Black and brown people yet. And we all have a part to play. And so to answer your question, I recognize what my role is right now. My role is to speak truth to power and to be as courageous and brave as I can, and give honor to those who came before me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes that makes a lot of sense. I actually, specifically getting into specifics, like at the city level, one thing I read about you is that you specifically worked in dealing with abandoned buildings and blight, and that's something that's someone who looks at real estate. It's something that's always been interesting to me. Right? Is it like you have these communities that get completely abandoned, but every year you're seeing a new community that a lot of money is being invested in, right? We see the gentrification, we see what's happened in Old Town East and in Columbus, for example. And the question that's rarely asked is, or cared about, is what happens to those people who had lived there for generations and have built a family and a community there that are pushed out. It's happening nationwide. You go back to redlining. With your experience, I just wanted you to kind of speak on your position on those issues and what you've learned actually addressing them.
Yeah, the story of housing and public housing in America is it's very interesting. And I think that when people think of ghettos or they think of projects or any subsidized housing, they automatically equate that with Black and brown people. But the reality is that public housing was built for medium income white people. Like that's how it got started. And so, history tells us that even after slavery ended, and even as we were going through Reconstruction and Jim Crow, Black people still were fighting for just decency, safe and affordable housing. And, there were restrictive covenants put in place where government entities were awarding contracts to developers who would help keep segregation in place, help create communities that were only for white people. And in fact, if you did allow your house to be, you sold a house to a Black family or resold it to a Black family, you could lose that insurance. You could lose that assistance from the government. So all of the incentive was there to create what we know now as ghettos, as what we know now as these blighted communities. So the work that I was doing at the Columbus City Attorney's office, was to abate public nuisances. These areas, these homes, whether it's an actual house or a gas station, a nightclub, if you were committing crimes, if you allowed those places to sit vacant or to be used for drug activity, we would bring injunctive actions to stop that activity. Because the reality is that you're not doing that in Dublin, right? You're not doing that in New Albany, but you're doing it down on the Near East Side. You're doing it on Long Street. I remember I brought a lawsuit against a convenience store, and we know that a lot of our communities are food deserts. And so one of the only places that people can get milk and eggs and things like that are our convenience stores, which is another problem. I'll digress from that. But this one in particular was running drugs out of there, out of the convenience store, right on Long Street. And so once our officers went in there and our investigators went in there, it was an insane amount of crack in the ceiling, and where kids come and get their food. This is where our elderly folks are getting their necessities. That's not right.
Right.
That's not right. Yeah. And to go alongside that, the place was in such disrepair that at any point, a person could have just fell through the ground floor into the basement of the building. The coolers were sinking the floor in. That's where our people were going. And that's not fair to me. That's not right for me. Yeah. And so that type of work, that also helped to inform my decision to run for council, because there's no way I could let that just happen in the area that I was responsible for as a city attorney. I wanted to carry that action out for the whole entire city of Columbus.
Yeah. I have a question too, because it seems like a lot of this stuff is related. Housing, unemployment, crime, all of these things are related. And one of the things that's been a topic through kind of this period of time the antagonists have brought up black on black crime, which is a fake term, right? It's just crime, right? It's a crime. People commit crime to people close to their vicinity. It's like 90% of crimes that black people commit are against black people, and high 80% of crimes that white people commit are against white people. It's just crime.
And nobody wants to take accountability for the culture that's created here.
Well, and that's what's going to be my question, which is that you cannot separate crime from the history, right? So, but you also have to, I guess, police, so to speak, crime. It's kind of a weird kind of situation to be in. How do you actually reconcile that as a city council person who understands the history, understands that a lot of the crime, like you just mentioned, some of it was just by terrible circumstances, but a lot of it was actually intentional. Where people were pushed, opportunities that people were prevented from getting, housing opportunities, schooling, education, and that forced a lot of people into crime. How do you actually reconcile that? That's the thing that I've had trouble with recently. How do you reconcile the fact that, okay, well, we can't let crime happen, but we also have to acknowledge the reason why it exists and take ownership for that?
Yes, and not only recognize it and take ownership over it, but do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, like if you know that the resources are not there, right? If educational resources are not there, if job opportunities are there, but they're not even paying what a person needs to make in order to survive in Columbus, Ohio right now, there's still going to be lack, right? There's so many contributing factors to why somebody decides to commit a crime. We have to acknowledge that, take ownership of it, and do something about it. That's why I'm here. And that's how I reconcile that. Because I understand that the educational opportunities, access to different opportunities, it's not there in our communities, right? And a lot of that is impacted by how housing and redlining has struck. And redlining was in Columbus, like that was a real thing in Columbus.
And you know what happened most recently with the housing crisis in 2009 is shameful.
Absolutely. And when you talk about, gentrification, that is real. I live on the east side, Old Town East. Yes, it is. Absolutely.
That's why I was asking the question I asked, because you see it. They have the money.
Yes.
They have the ability to take the worst neighborhood and turn it into the best neighborhood.
Exactly.
Why do they pick and choose when they want to do it? And it's always based on the population of people that are going there. Exactly. And that's and I think Mecca got to this earlier is, okay, there's a Fair Housing Act, right? Where they tell all landlords, I've been a landlord, so I know that you can't discriminate based on race, right? But in actuality, how do you actually police something like that? Yes, it's under law, but I know for a fact as a landlord that landlords throughout the country are not leasing in predominantly white neighborhoods still to African Americans and minorities.
And let me tell you something real quick on that too, V, that just reminded me of. I was at Avis. This is a car rental place and this was actually in New Jersey. And I became kind of friendly with the guys, so I used to rent cars from them. And they told me that when they would get calls about cars, if the person lived in a certain zip code, they wouldn't rent the cars to them. So they wouldn't tell them a reason. They would just say, oh, sorry, there are no cars available. And that this is a practice that they had happening for years. And what he just said reminded me of that. Is like, how do you even police that? How do you even deal with issues like that?
Yeah. I started kind of smiling, laughing when you started that introduction. And it's so this is why voting is so important as well. Because when you think of something like the Fair Housing Act and why that is so important, if we look at we look at our White House, right? Your president, and who you put in place as a president. Now, those people might not get they don't face elections, right? Those are appointed positions, and so the director of housing, the Secretary of Housing and Development,
Ben Carson.
Yes,
he knows nothing about it.
It's funny, but it's not funny at all.
It's so sad.
It's so not important, but that's why it's so important to exercise your right to vote, because when you pick the leader, you're also putting your faith that leader is going to select the right people to be in the right positions. We're in the same conversation. I mean, all of us have, gone to college, right? When you think about, I don't know if you guys have student loans, but I went to law school and Ohio State. I got student loans. Okay.
Yes.
And you think of who's in charge of education, right? Who's making these decisions? Someone who has never had the experience of public education.
Yeah.
Right? And understanding the intricacies of that, which is completely different than a private education.
Yeah.
And there's no judgment there, but there's also the understanding that you're going to have to make provisions for those who are going through the public education process that you're not going to do for those who have gone, because you can pay for it outright.
Right. Right.
That's one of the I am one of the very reasons why the wealth, Black Americans' wealth has been stagnant for 70 years. And the fact that we have a college education does nothing to mitigate that at all.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question on education, since you just brought it up. One of the things that I think has started to dominate certain conversations now is education, right? And I think a lot of people, white and Black and other, are starting to realize that the education that they received in this country was woefully inadequate and deliberately left out a lot of different significant parts of not just Black history, but our history as a country. And a lot of people have started to like really examine, like, wow, what was I taught? What wasn't I taught? Why wasn't I taught it?
Yeah.
How do we address that issue now? Because I think, again, part of what at least white people and other people, and even Black people to a certain degree, think about Black history, a lot of it is shaped from what they learned in school. So if you learn that, slavery is something that happened hundreds of years ago, civil rights movement happened, and after Martin Luther King was shot, that everything changed and everything's been good. That in a lot of ways, and you haven't taken any other courses in college like we did and stuff like that, that in a lot of ways shapes your kind of impression. And a lot of people's impressions are being changed now. What do you think can be done about that to actually, make sure that our history is actually included and people start to get educated about these things?
Yeah, this is it's troubling. I read a tweet over the weekend from Trump acknowledging from his perspective that he made Juneteenth popular.
Yeah.
And, after you get over the initial anger of that comment, it's actually an indictment on our education system in the United States of America.
Yep.
That's really nothing to be boasting about. And what I have seen from a lot of my white colleagues and friends has been this this moment of like, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know. I really didn't know what I didn't know. And so that's one of the amazing things of the internet, I think, right now, and social media, because in real time, you can kind of, to the best of your ability, present a good argument to some of that nonsense. People want to get educated in this moment. There are so many resources that are available at their fingertips. I mean, the internet didn't even work for us when we were in college like this, right? But it's available now. But it's a travesty what has happened.
Nobody has an excuse to be ignorant with the internet, essentially, is what you're saying.
And I think that this is also an opportunity for, I think, the majority to own what part they have played in this. Right. Yeah. What I have been saying and trying to convey this message is, I think for a lot of, and we like to use this term progressives, white people that are woke, so to speak. But Amy Cooper was a progressive, and she still called the police on Christian Cooper, who was a Black man bird watching. Right. And so I think there's a disconnect for many white people who think that just because they don't use the N-word, there's not racism there. That because they voted for Obama and they've got Black friends, that they are not racist. And you as the person in the majority have to take a step back and see if you're part of the problem because you hold those very same beliefs. Right? And all we can do is continue to be in our truth and speak these things. But the reality is that I alone can't do this.
Yeah.
We're not completely, we don't have the power by ourselves to be able to do this.
One quick question, V, real quick. It's just on that. As far as the specific educational curriculum, is that something that you guys actually have a hand in designing?
No, we don't.
Okay. Where does that come from?
State. Yeah, that's the state legislature. So
Okay.
we help to support up until pre-K, but that is state legislature.
So if you wanted to petition about getting things changed, how do you do it?
So hold on. So because you went there, let's go ahead and go there.
Okay.
Because I think in Columbus, and I'm not sure of the reach of the podcast, but Columbus can at sometimes appear like a bubble because we're so people might disagree with me right now because of what the civil unrest that we have. But we have held one of the largest LGBTQ plus marches in the country. We have so many universities and,
consistently rated one of the best places for minorities too.
Yeah. One of the, very, 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 very welcoming. But at the same time, that doesn't reflect the state of Ohio. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the state legislature, the Republicans have a supermajority. Yeah. And so Democrats, where the city of Columbus just passed some legislation acknowledging that racism is a public health crisis. The state tried to do that as well. They're still trying to do it. And they couldn't even get past, why are Black people getting COVID more than white people? It's because they don't wash their hands. So that's where we're at as the state.
Right.
Yeah. And
so
that's all fronts. You get out of any of the cities in Ohio and you realize that there is a lot of the same mentality that's in the Deep South. It's kind of like this dichotomy that's very, very interesting. Yeah. And that shed some light on it. I wanted to circle back, and this is kind of a broad, focusing on education, right? But I think one of the overall issues that we're talking about is a lack of education and of the citizens of this country, right? There is a lot of ignorance, willful and trained. But a lot of that in capitalism, you look at where are the resources going, right? And at the federal level, the thing that I always look at is how much is spent on defense versus everything else. And then you study this at the city level, and getting to you is that same is true at the city level. There's more spent on policing in almost every major city in America than is spent on the development of the community. And why do you think that has been that case historically and continues to be?
Well, the history of police in our country really dates back to slavery. I mean, police were created in order for slave owners to be able to get their property back, right? To protect actual property, not just human property, but to protect actual property. Mm-hmm. And so we are working off of a somewhat flawed model, which is some of the reasons why a lot of people advocate that reform is just not possible, that policing is doing what it was exactly created to do, even in 2020. Yeah. And so I'm in the camp that, we do have to be even more critical of how we allocate money, not only in the city of Columbus, but on a federal level as well. But I can only speak for us, and what my position is that I don't think that police officers should be having to administer Narcan to somebody who is ODing. Like, I think that should be for a health professional to be able to do that. That shouldn't be that officer's job. I don't think that officers should have to respond to, mental health crisis moments or dealing with individuals who are hoarders. Like, I think that there's an opportunity for us to level set in this country as to what policing looks like in 2020 and beyond, and what it is we actually expect. I think we expect too much of officers to do things that they are not trained to do, but are responsible for doing in our community. And I think it's time to spread that around.
So here's the interesting thing about like the whole conversation, and this is like the defunding the police conversation, right? And how does that look? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I think there's a branding of it that some people have a visceral reaction to. They hear defunding. They're like, what does that mean? We don't want police anymore.
Yeah.
And so that people stop listening. But then I think there's a way that you kind of presented it, which is that we need to kind of reallocate resources, and social workers can deal with certain things. It doesn't always have to be the police. But then I think there's a position that's even more towards the middle, I guess you can say, which is that let's not let this conversation just come down to, poor police, they have to deal with too many things. Let's take some of the things out of their hands, and let's actually deal with some of the things that you said, the origins of policing, how they're actually policing. Even if you take out 50% of them, how they're policing in those areas.
And who's overseeing and who's overseeing them, right? You can't have a legislative body whose results are in direct correlation with the police, right? You can't. Yeah. How do you unwind these things? And you guys are the lawyers, so I'm going to ask let you answer.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Is like, I mean, obviously, and then you realize that there are different precincts and they're different police at local and state level. Like, there isn't a national necessarily like thing for policing. So some of these issues you have to look at state by state and even more locally.
City by city, right?
Yeah,
city by city.
City by city. But I guess the question is, how do we, in your opinion, if you were the one that was in charge and you were the one that was going to determine exactly how this thing would go, and let's just talk about the city of Columbus, what would be the steps that we would go to kind of reforming some of these things? One issue, like you said, is what are police responding to? Yes, we have them responding to too many things. But the other issue, which is equally important, if not more important, is how they're actually policing. Techniques, strategies, the justice system, racial bias, all of those type of things. How do we deal with those? How would we actually deal with those? Because it's so deep, and I know it's a hard question. It's so deep. Yeah,
it is, and it's not an easy process. And I think, if people are looking for police reform overnight, they don't want real reform.
Yeah.
Because what we can do today is really, in part, dictated by the FOP contract, and so that is a carefully negotiated thing, right? That we just willy-nilly can't go say, okay, change that today.
Right.
Now, our contract is up at the end of the year, and the Mayor Ginther has been very clear about his position on the FOP needing to be a part of this process, that we need you to be a willing participant in police reform and the changing that needs to happen with rebuilding or building positive community police relations. To some degree, and arguably, I agree that I don't know if it's ever been really good between Black and brown communities and police.
No,
I'm an individual who's actually worked with police and have had moments of like that visceral reaction when, an officer comes at you crazy. I was down. I've been at a lot of the marches and protests over the past 3 weeks. I was down when it kind of hit the fan on that Saturday in Columbus now 2.5 weeks ago. And nobody cared that I was an elected official. I still got a fight. So at the end of the day, I'm Black.
Yeah.
Black woman, right? And so what we need at this moment is for the police to be a part of the system that is acknowledging where mistakes have gone, like call things out as they are. Yes. And should be officers who are competent enough and confident enough in their jobs as to say what happened to George Floyd is a travesty to our body as police officers.
Yes.
Like, this is not what we believe in as officers, whether it's in the city of Columbus or anywhere. We absolutely.
That's what bothered me, that didn't seem to happen at a national level.
It did not.
And it seems like this, and it seemed like it was a missed opportunity. That was kind of a fairly easy one. I think for the most part, this was one where you could say George Floyd. The reason people always ask, well, what was it about the George Floyd one that you think finally set the world off? And I think it was because it was 9 minutes. I think it was because there was video. I think it was because you could see that he wasn't resisting. There was no threat to the officer. It was everything that the stories that you kind of hear. Oh, he was reaching. Oh, I feared for my life. Oh, it was a quick reaction. All that type of stuff didn't exist there. And so I felt like it was an easy situation and the perfect opportunity for the good police officers to come out and brand themselves and say, listen, we distance ourselves from this type of policing completely. That is a complete travesty. We will do everything in our power to make sure that never happens in our departments. We are going to retrain our officers to make sure, blah, blah. I mean, it was just like he said, a layup. Yeah. And they failed nationally with that. And that's part of the reason why you're seeing some of the visceral reaction across the country.
The police overall have instigated a lot of the violence and issues by the way that they are policing these protests and rallies. The moment, if you come out in riot gear and tear gas people, what do you think is going to happen? That creates a reaction, right?
Yeah, it does. I think that, as leaders, I think that you build community trust by acknowledging not only your successes, but your failures. And I don't think there's anything wrong in that. No. I think that's why the community doesn't trust us, why the community doesn't trust officers and, corporate America. And people are so ego-driven and so afraid of looking, I don't know, wrong, weak, bad, whatever, weak, that they don't see the strength in acknowledging your downfall. Yeah. And this is not who and what I am.
Right. So let's talk about real quick, too. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but, like the Columbus itself, right? And now Columbus is actually facing unique issues. Yeah. Obviously, they're dealing with the policing issues like that, but they're also dealing with the word and Columbus and the meaning behind it. And the statue has now come down, Columbus State, and now there's talks of changing the name. Some suggest Flavortown, whatever. But I guess I have a couple questions. One is, what do you think kind of about that idea, right? Because what I tweeted on Twitter was that people think that just because something has been long-standing means that it's not problematic, and it hasn't been problematic, right? So just because it's been standing for 100 years does not mean that it's not problematic. So that's number one. But then the second thing, I guess this is kind of as a council member and as an attorney, what would actually have to happen if we really did want to change the name of Columbus and we did want to acknowledge, his history and those ills? What would actually have to happen legally to get that to happen?
So the conversation about the statute and the statutes around the country, because it's not just in Columbus.
You're right.
I have been hit because I've been very vocal about, my position as it relates to this stuff. And, the reality is that your history is not encapsulated in a statute, right? Right. And not all history is meant to be celebrated. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference there. The reality is that for the most part, all of white history is memorialized in our history books. Black history is not. Mm-hmm. Our indigenous history is not. And that's the problem. That history, Black and brown and indigenous history, has been reduced down to Martin Luther King and Sojourner Truth. Yeah. Not even Sojourner Truth. I went too far. Maybe Harriet Tubman. That's it. Yeah. And that's all people know about slavery. Literally, that's in a couple of boats. That's all that they know. And so, of course, there's going to be some visceral reaction from the majority who doesn't have the true history of what we know to be true. Right. And so I'm okay with these uncomfortable conversations that are happening because I am extending grace to people that just do not know. Yeah. It's really ignorance. Yeah. It's just you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And the reality is that once again, we can present that information, but you as the individual, and if we're just talking about the majority here who might be having that visceral reaction, you at some point you have to take a step back and say, my God, maybe I don't know everything I thought I knew. And maybe something was missing from my history books. I go back to Juneteenth once again. Yeah. That has always been there. Yeah. I have a group of friends. We celebrate Juneteenth every year. The fact that you don't know doesn't say anything about me. It says something more about you and the education that you did not receive.
Yeah.
And so that means that there is a moment that those who are in power in that space, they're going to have to be the ones to start instigating some of that change.
And also some of it has to be physically changed in textbooks, right? Columbus did not discover America. Like, they have to acknowledge that, right? And that's the thing, is they don't want to acknowledge, there are some people who just do not want to acknowledge the truth of that history, right? And that's why it's not written about in the history books, because it's something that if we acknowledge, we have to acknowledge the overall issue that we have as America that's kind of being exposed fully to the world right now, right?
Well, I also think is that it also makes you have to examine who you are, right? Because a lot of who you are is based on who you've been taught to believe that you are. And I think that's part of why this has been so uncomfortable for a lot of people, is they're starting to say, wait, if this happened, and wait, this happened, and hold on, and that happened, and wait, then what does that mean for my life? What does that mean for how my life developed? And my grandfather, who was able to leave me, like, I have a white friend whose grandfather left him like acres of land in South Carolina, that he's just waiting to cash in on. It's like, we don't have that in our have that in our communities. You know what I mean? So like, so I wanted to get back to this question, because I asked you this, and I know it's kind of a long question, but if we really did want to change the name, do you know what the process is for that? Like, would it be a vote?
I actually haven't even started going down that path.
Right.
And I know I've heard Flavortown, which is what in the world? Come on. I to be honest with you, I'm more concerned around the statue than the actual name. Because I think we in Columbus have owned Columbus to the degree that we really highlight the us at the end of Columbus. And to me, it's starting to take on, it has always taken on a different meaning.
I don't think of him when I say the name Columbus. It doesn't even cross my mind, right?
It's almost like reclaiming the word.
I'm sorry?
It's like reclaiming the word and kind of giving it your own meaning for it.
Exactly. But there is a difference, I believe, in having these statutes of individuals who have been responsible for atrocities in this country. Oh, you went out for just a second. I think there's this reconciliation moment for a lot.
Technical difficulties.
I hope she caught it too, though. She's still talking. She was saying something.
Yeah, she said that we went out, so I'm sure that I wonder what's going on. She said her Wi-Fi was having some issues, so.
Yeah. It's a nightmare.
This has been good, though. I mean, are you back? Yeah.
You guys there?
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you back.
I told y'all this Wi-Fi was being a little shady today.
We were just hoping that you caught it because you were saying something. I was like, I hope she's not still talking.
I think that some people are starting to reconcile with the fact that their comfort has been built on our discomfort. It has been built on people dying and people having sacrificed themselves for generations in order for this idea of the American dream to be a reality for only a select few of people. And now, as the country has transitioned to being browner, that can no longer be the story, because, we're all connected as it is, but now you have Black grandchildren and you have a white granddaughter, and so those conversations and the motivation to think outside of your world is really there for people where it hasn't been in the past. So.
And that's true, and I think that is one of the kind of results of, I guess, integration, so to speak. Even though there's still a lot of segregation, is that people are now being exposed to people that they haven't been exposed to before. People are starting to intermingle and procreate with people, and like you said, create. I've had white people tell me they didn't realize racism until they procreated with someone Black and they had a child and saw how their child was even treated differently than they were and stuff like that. So, but one thing I do want to ask you before we get to something fun too is, and you've talked about this a little bit, but like the challenges of being kind of a double minority. I talk to my sisters about this a lot. You're Black and you're also a woman. So some of the challenges that you faced as you've been trying to navigate, kind of through this, political landscape and even being an attorney. And then also, I guess, something more positive that you would kind of advice that you would give young women who are looking up to you, who kind of want to do what you're doing. What would you say to them?
So some of the challenges, so the interesting for people that don't know my actual story with council, there was a seat that had been vacated by an African-American woman. Her name is Jiza Page. She was elected to one of our judicial seats in Columbus. And so that left a vacancy on council. And so I, along with 20-ish other people, no, actually it was more than that, and then it got narrowed down, applied for that open seat. And then I was selected to fill her seat. And then that very same year, I also had to run to keep the seat. Mm-hmm. So like, it was a whole lot. Right. And so very quickly, I understood in a way that was just, that I didn't know before, like how privilege really does work.
Mm-hmm. All the time while she's saying something really good too,
Yeah, they don't want it. They don't want the world to hear. They don't.
Right. They don't want it to be great. This has been good though. She's really, really good. I can see her being president one day.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're about to wrap up. So hopefully she can regain Wi-Fi and then we can let her go.
How are you guys going to fix the problems if you can't fix the Wi-Fi?
I don't know what's going on. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. Put the bandwidth down because everybody's been working from home and now we're coming back. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I'll get back. I'll do it quickly. It's already difficult for women to raise money in political environments.
Yeah.
I think it's, you add even a little extra level on that as an African-American woman.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to find my footing last year and trying to be successful as a first-time candidate in a very difficult and very contentious race. There was a very contentious race for city council last year. Yeah. But what I recognized very quickly is that I needed to just be me.
Yeah.
Like, without a shadow of a doubt. I did not need to pretend to be like my white colleagues. I was the only Black candidate on my ticket. People needed to see me and me completely. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes as Black people, you feel the need to have to filter yourself. Mm-hmm. So there's like this duality of that we're always walking in all the time, exhausting. But that is how we're able to stay successful, how we don't turn into the angry Black man or the angry Black woman. Mm-hmm. So that's what I really mean when it relates to privilege. Like I have had to really learn painfully that there are spaces where I can show up completely and I'm not going to be labeled the angry Black woman, but people are ready to receive it, right? Mm-hmm. But that just means that not just me, but everyone who looks like me has to do that. Yeah. And then America adjusts, right? We have adjusted so much in order to be successful, whatever that means, that we don't come fully as ourselves. Yeah. And what the world needs is Shayla to be genuine. Yeah. For both of you to be genuine every single day. Yeah. And then for us to go out and do what we've been called to do, but we can't do that pretending to be someone else.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think,
that's a great point.
Yeah.
I have one last question on your work to leave it kind of in another optimistic note. What about Columbus gives you hope? You're in there now. You're working at the grassroots level. You're working within the government. What gives you hope for this city?
I think over the past 3.5 weeks, I've been to, almost a dozen different marches and protests. That's what gives me hope. That I have gone to events organized by our LGBTQ community, our BLM community, the youth, folks that you think might not even be advocating in this space right now. And it's just been incredible to see that type of support in ways that we've never seen it before. I told you I live on the Near East Side, which is very interesting, right? It's a mix,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I take these walks, and one day I saw in just one walk, Black Lives Matter posted on these historical homes that are white owned. I saw a case of water set out for folks who were just in support of the movement. Take water if you need it, right? Like, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
That's what gives me hope about Columbus, that we have leaders and people who are accessible in ways that you go to other different cities and you couldn't just if you wanted to meet with the CEO of Nationwide, you could probably do it today. Like, that's how accessible we are to each other in Columbus, and you don't have that in other places. And when it comes to movements like this, those people are saying, what can we do? How can we help? That's what gives me hope.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so we're going to get you out of here on something fun, off the subject completely. So the first question we have for you is, who are your top 5 musicians of all time? Personal list.
Okay, of all time. So of all time, I'm going to say, I got to throw MJ in there. I'm throwing Michael Jackson in there. Don't come for me in the comments. I don't know if there's a comment. Jill Scott, all day.
Yeah.
Sade. And I always put this in terms of like who I would actually pay to see.
Okay.
Who else would I put in my category? I love anything that is in this like chill realm. So there's an artist, I think she's from up north, actually, Cleveland-ish, Alana Baraz. Like, I love her music. Like, every album she's put out. And then
we have to wait for the good. We have to wait for the good one. We have to wait for the good one. Who do you think it's gonna be? You think it's gonna be a singer? You think it's gonna be a rapper?
Maybe Prince. Erica Badu.
Prince. Yeah. I think it's gonna be a rapper. So I think it's gonna be like Tupac. That's my guess. Lauryn Hill. That'd be BC if she shows up.
Listen, you guys better not be talking about me, calling me Teddy Riley or Nelly. Okay?
No, we didn't. We didn't. We were just trying to guess who your 5th person was going to be.
My who?
Your 5th. Who your 5th artist was going to be.
Oh, who'd you think?
We came up with a few. Go ahead.
Yeah, we can't.
You guys tell me. What do you think?
Well, we had Tupac in there. We had Lauryn Hill in there. Those were the 2 that we were kind of going back and forth.
You're not too far off. Those are good.
Okay.
I'll throw them in there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I was always more of a Tupac than a Biggie fan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I can see that.
And then the second one is your top 5 athletes, people you've admired in the world of sports.
So, I don't know. I have to say Serena just because, right? And then I would throw some basketball folks in there, like if I could wrap them in one, like like your Kobe's and your LeBrons.
Put them all together.
Put them all together.
Right.
I don't know. I guess what I would say is
Muhammad Ali.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I do love boxing. Did you know that about me?
I didn't know.
Oh yeah, I do love boxing.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's right. That's something we have in common.
Yes.
V loves boxing.
What I will say is that, like, I have great respect for athletes because the discipline that it takes is to be like at the top of your game is the same type of intensity and discipline I want to bring in this space.
Yeah.
That if I have to shoot 1,000 times in order to perfect my 3-point shot, then that's what I want to do when it comes to being the best advocate, the best representative, the best council member that I can be.
Mhm.
And I look to athletes for that type of discipline.
And the best ones, they take no days off too. So that's another thing.
Yes, no days off. And whether you get paid or you don't get paid, you still have to be out there doing the job.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I have to ask this: do you have any like cooking icons or celebrity chefs you admire, since you're heavily into that space as well?
I am. Did you guys know I went to culinary school before law school?
I read it. I read that you had.
Yep.
So there was this moment in time that I really did want to be on the Food Network.
Mm-hmm.
And I transitioned to like a vegan lifestyle almost 3 years ago now. And so I really thought that I could use that space to educate people on like eating healthy and like do my own cooking show. But now that like I like truly admire, I follow like a lot of people on YouTube who like do different cooking, healthy cooking type options. But I just watch Food Network just to watch Food Network.
Yeah. Chopped is my favorite.
Oh God, Chopped, Cutthroat Kitchen, which stresses me out.
That one's too stressful.
Well, Shayla, thank you so much. Honestly, this has been phenomenal. I know your time is scarce right now, so we really enjoyed this. It's very informative. Obviously, like we said, we go back 20 years, so it's been inspiring to watch your career, and we are going to keep rooting for you as you continue doing what you do and keep bringing that athlete-like intensity. We love it. So thank you for joining us. Yeah.
I feel like your viewers and listeners are going to be a little confused because we look like we're 25. So I don't know how we.
Right.
Hey, we are 25.
There it is. Exactly. Seriously.
No, thank you. This has been really fun. This was very fun. I had a good time.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Have a good one and be safe out there.
Boys, we get on up. We the fly boys, we get